Good afternoon. I really enjoy coming to the Philippines. It's the 4th time I've been, and I think there are 3 words I think of. I always think of graciousness, I think of warmth, but I do think of fun. We went dancing in Cebu, and I texted Scott to say I think I've had the most fun night I've ever had, because people were dancing with us without any inhibition, and we just had a lovely time, so it's really nice to be back. I want to talk to you about the importance of challenge. It's one of the most difficult skills when you're coaching. So that's what I want to focus on. And most organisations are looking for exceptional performance nowadays. And if you want exceptional performance, you've got to have exceptional people. Now, I've worked with hundreds of teams, and what I've learned is exceptional people aren't born. They become exceptional because they work incredibly hard at something they deeply care about. And because they deeply care about it, it doesn't feel such a burden to work incredibly hard. And it becomes almost like a virtuous circle. It encourages them they want to learn because they care about it. When you're recruiting, find people who are really interested in what the job is you want them to do. They're interested in learning. They'll ask a lot of questions. You know, they'll share knowledge. They're open to feedback. And I think the best leaders... Sorry, I think I'll just pull this away a bit. It's popping. Is that right? Popping, Jana? She tells me about popping. I think the best leaders, they know something more than, to be a great leader, you've got to develop yourself. They really understand that if you're going to be a great leader, you've got to develop other people. Sorry, could somebody help me? Can I take it right out of the way? Okay. They understand that you've really got to help other people develop. And that's what coaching is all about. It's the art of facilitating the learning, the development, the enhanced performance of another person. Because nothing spectacular is ever created by one person. If you're going to get something amazing, you need lots of different people together. Now, I've met many good leaders, but when they're good, but they're not exceptional, the reason is they do want to develop themselves. They often strive to develop themselves. They do want to help other people to develop as well, but they just still haven't learned something really important. And what they haven't learned is that developing people is not about trying to produce a clone of yourself. Because sometimes leaders keep giving people lots of advice and saying, well, what works for me? And those things don't help, because when you're coaching, the key is you're helping people find solutions which take account of their style and personality. And therefore, leaders have to stop giving as much advice. I'm not saying giving advice is always terrible, but an exceptional leader is very cautious about it. Because when you're giving advice, your advice is based on your strengths, your belief system, what you learn with the people you interact with, which takes no account of their belief system, their strengths, and the kind of people that they're interacting with. And so it often doesn't work. And then they try and avoid you because they're worried you'll say, did you do what I said? And they don't know how to say, I don't actually think that's the best solution. And so it can actually put a gap in. It was meant to help, but it puts a gap in. When I talk to people who are unhappy in their relationship with their leader, I can't tell you how many times the unhappiness falls into 2 diametrically opposing camps. So one group says to me, I like my leader as a person. They're not a bad person. I can see they're a kind person, but they delegate some complex, difficult tasks to me, and I rarely see them. They ring up once a month and say, is it going well? Closed leading question. So I say, sure. What they get paid to do, I've got no idea. Their perception is, my leader has abandoned me. But the other group that's unhappy says exactly the opposite. They say, my leader's a nice enough person, we get on well socially, I can see they're a kind person, but they delegate some complex, difficult tasks to me, and then they just keep telling me how I should do it. They keep saying, now, what I suggest you try here. Now, what I found was, and it drives me nuts, because the suggestions that they come up with don't always work in the world I'm operating in. So how do you walk through these two extremes? You've got to learn how to coach. And coaching is a leadership style that requires the most emotional intelligence competencies. It's the hardest. It's not the only one you need, but it's the hardest. And I had a wonderful example where, senior leaders thinking they should make all the decisions could be very dangerous. I happened to be in Brisbane when the G20 was on, so all the world leaders were there, high security in every hotel. Now, when the G20 had been held the time before Brisbane, it had been in Canada. And I don't know if anybody remembers, we got a delegate from Canada, you might remember. There was a lot of violence and reports of police brutality, and there was a real big, issue in the international press. So the day before my workshop in Brisbane, which happened to be on coaching, the police commissioner came on the television to reassure the Australian population why she was confident that there would not be a repetition of the violence in Canada. And this is what she said. She said, we now have to accept we made a fundamental error. We believe that this was so important, all the senior officers should make most of the decisions. So they had central command and a very sophisticated surveillance system with people talking, in little walkie-talkies in their ears and everything being videoed. And a senior leader was telling 5 to 7 police under his command how to respond to what was happening. And she said, now we just have to accept that that doesn't take account of how it feels on the ground. And I thought that was fantastic. It just doesn't take account of how it feels on the ground. You need a team that you've equipped with enough emotional intelligence that they can make those split-second decisions when they're dealing with the complexity of emotion. So it isn't that you don't do anything, but you just make sure when you're coaching that they can see all their options, but not give them advice. And with each option, together you work out what would the pros and cons of each option be, but they decide what they do, not you. And that's how you create a truly empowered culture. If you keep giving advice, you don't realise that you're the reason it's not empowered. Somebody's got a problem, they go, oh, boss, I don't know what to do, what should I do about this? And it's quite flattering when somebody wants our help. So you say, oh, well, we're different, but what worked for me was, I go, oh, thank you. Off they go. The next time they've got a problem, they think, who sorts out problems? It's not me, it's the boss. Boss, what do we do? And then when you're on your holidays, nobody can function because you have colluded with them to believe they're not capable of solving problems. Now, I was working with one of our sponsors in Singapore. It's a hotel called the Royal Plaza on Scots, and they've won lots of awards for their customer service. And I had an amazing experience. They didn't know I was one of the trainers. It actually happened. I was distressed in Singapore, and the way they dealt with it was just phenomenal. And they have, I believe, a strong coaching culture. And I was doing an extra seminar with them on coaching, and one of these wonderful, bright millennials came up to me after the workshop, and she said, Lynn, I'm so glad I did your workshop. I'm so glad because I had such a big misunderstanding. And she looked really distressed, and I'm going, it's okay. What was the misunderstanding? She said, I knew I couldn't give advice, but I thought I had to be like an ATM machine. I said, right, I'm sorry, I still don't really know what you mean. She said, I thought I had to have all the options. I thought I had to go, there's an option, there's an option, there's an option, there's an option. Oh, it was so exhausting. I said, yeah, that would be really exhausting. When you're coaching people, you don't have to have all the options because you're working with smart people. And if I keep it simple, I think there's something really simple you could do. The first thing you do is find out what they've already tried. Because suggesting an option that somebody's always tried can feel a bit patronising. They could be thinking, well, I've done that. Yeah, I've done that. So just make sure that you're not repeating things that they've already tried. But sometimes, when they say what they've already tried, you realise there could be a blind spot. They say, well, I talked to them and that didn't help. And they want to kind of throw away the possibility of ever talking to them about it. Well, there's a lot of ways to have a conversation. So maybe you could look at some other options in different ways they could talk to them about it. So I always find out what they've done, and then I say, is there anything you're considering doing? Is there any half-formed ideas? Anything on the back burner? Use language that suits you and your culture. But the main message must be, I'm not expecting a solution. If you say, what's the solution? That's really scary. It's too big. They haven't had time to think. And your job is to create the time for them to just think. And so the impression is it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to work. We're just playing here. So they might come up with, well, I'm not sure this will work, but I had been wondering about this. You say, okay, well, let's look at all the pros and cons of that option. And then you say, any other thoughts, any other ideas, anything crazy. And you do not breathe one option from your own mind until they've exhausted every option they could possibly consider. And that's when you start learning a lot as well, because they think of options you've never thought of. You think, oh, that was good, I'll have to remember that again next time I'm helping somebody else. And one of the things that came up in a couple of them, with Grace and with Micah, the importance of bridging sort of the gap between the generations. Coaching bridges the gap. Because, yes, when we're older, we do have something of value and some wisdom we can offer, but the world is changing and they know things we don't. And between you, if you can find a way to just look at every option, you're a fabulous team. And then, when they've exhausted every option they can think of, you pause and you think, can I think of any options? And sometimes you can't. And that doesn't mean you've failed. This is like credit to them that they've thought of so many. But sometimes you're experiencing you can. But when you're coaching, the real test is you've got to be sure that you offer it as an option and not as what I think of as veiled advice. Now, clear advice is this is what you should do. Veiled advice is, how about this good option? Now, something that you might find useful is, and like all your energy goes into presenting it as though I'm trying to give you a clue. And especially if you're the boss, they think that's what you want me to do. All right, we'll do that, and then if it goes wrong, it'll be your fault. And it's just got to be what I call emotionally flat. It's just like, I can think of another couple of options. I'm not sure how relevant they are in your situation. One option might be this. And sometimes you think, oh, they'll think this is brilliant. And they tell you straight away why it won't work. And you think, oh, it's okay, another option is this. And then they go, actually, that's quite interesting. I hadn't thought of that. It's okay, well, let's just look at the pros and cons of that. So it is a complex process, but I'm trying to simplify some of it as much as I can. Now, I want to go on to really spend the rest of the time I have just on the skill of challenge. Now, there are many skills you need to learn to coach, and many of them you might not know what they call, but if you study it, you'll find you probably do some of them anyway, because many women do have a lot of these soft skills. They might be more inclined to ask open questions and, get people to be a bit more specific, and so there's all sorts of skills we need, but the hardest skill of coaching is challenge. And I've simplified it down to 4 things that if I had to keep it the most simple I could ever make it, this is the 4 things you remember. Now, your primary task when you're challenging anybody is to challenge them to recognise their strengths. It doesn't mean at time you can't get them to see some things that might be more difficult for them to hear, but if your tendency is to get them to keep thinking about what they can improve on, you undermine their confidence and self-esteem, and you leave them less able to cope. Now, just to illustrate how important this is, I lived in Malaysia for a few years, and I was coaching a wonderful young woman. She was 34, and she had a very senior position in a flour mill. She's called Miss Wong. And partway through our work, I said to her, Miss Wong, what are your strengths? She said, I don't know. I said, well, guess. Well, she tried so hard to find those strengths. She's here, she's looking all over for them. And she finally looked up, and she did actually again look slightly distressed, and she said, I'm not trying to be difficult, Lynn. Nobody's ever told me I've got any strengths. I don't know what my strengths are. At that point, I actually could have cried. And I think sometimes, in the British culture, it's important to be raised with humility, but it's very, very strong in the Philippines and in a lot of other parts of Southeast Asia. And there's a lot of beautiful things about humility, but the downside is sometimes people don't realise how fantastic they are. So one of your jobs is, if you're working with somebody who has a blind spot about how fantastic they are, your job is to just tell them. So I said, well, Miss Wong, I know this is only my opinion, but being as you don't need strengths, I'm just going to tell you the strengths that I've seen in you. And I'm really good. That's one of the things I'm really good at. I look at for people's strengths. So I started to just list the many strengths she had. And partway into the process, she started to cry, and she just could not stop crying. 3 weeks later, she sent me an email, and she said, Lynn, I was that close to giving up my job. I thought I couldn't do it. She said, and then you saw some things in me, and when you told me what they were, I believed you. And you know, now I know I can do my job. Just before Christmas, she sent me an email. And one of the things I teach people who I work with is, outside the family, even in Britain, you know, you shouldn't brag. Most people in our culture don't like you being a big head. But inside the family, just talk about how phenomenal you are. You know, create little, you know, we're a family at work. We can brag about ourselves. So she knew that I would be delighted if she bragged. She said, I thought you'd be pleased to know, Lynn, that I've just done the kind of the highest levels of exams she can do in her area. She hadn't just got the highest score of anybody ever in Malaysia. She got the highest score ever in the world. And that lady nearly gave up a job just because somebody wasn't helping her see how special she was. So that's something really easy you can do. If we had time, I'd ask you to talk about it on your tables, but because we've only got a short time, I'm hoping you'll drive home, you'll start thinking about what are my strengths. And if you're not sure, go to women that you feel psychologically safe with and say, will you help me? I might have a bit of a blind spot. I'm great at seeing what's wrong with me. Could you help me see what's right with me? And that would be a fabulous thing women can really do for each other. Now, the second point I want to remember about challenges, if you're challenging somebody to see the strengths, you know, they might get a bit embarrassed, but they're not normally upset or distressed. But sometimes, before somebody can be their best, they may have to face the fact that there's some aspect of their behaviour that isn't working well for them and other people. And a really good coach just gives somebody at least one chance to challenge themselves before they suggest that they might behave a different way, because it doesn't hurt us as much if we say something negative about ourselves as have somebody kind of smack us in the face with it. So I'll give you an example which we'll pull in point 2 and 3 in a moment. And then the third thing is, if you're going to do something which somebody could feel is confrontational, it could set off what I call our not okay fears, you have to be sure you've earned the right to do that. Now, if I keep it simple, there are 2 things that in my experience give you the right to get other people to consider making difficult changes. And the first one is, you've got to invite criticism of yourself. This is a very important leadership issue. Fabulous leaders often say, what do you need from me that I don't do? Did I do anything last year that caused you more problems than you thought you should have had? And you don't fall apart if somebody's brave enough to illustrate that they don't think you're a perfect leader. You just model that we're all learning. Because if you haven't first modelled you're open to criticism, when you're criticising this other person in their eyes, they might even know that there's some truth in what you're saying. But the reaction is they want to go, why do you go around looking for splinters in other people's eyes when you seem to have a plank in your own? They kind of feel like this is unfair. And so they can throw away the criticism. So you have to show that you can invite criticism, and they have to believe that you did it because you want the best from them. You weren't doing it because you were stressed or a bit mad that day. You did it because you've always seen what's right with them. You want them to be the best, and they weren't able to challenge themselves, so maybe this is just a blind spot. And you have to be able to show tough love. And I think, tough love it's one of the hardest things to do, but it's one of the greatest gifts you can give people. And one of my best coaches, I've had some wonderful coaches, I've had some wonderful mentors, but one of them helped me understand something I didn't know about myself. Now, I brought from my background this need to be very fast. And my mother was a busy woman, I love my mother dearly, but I remember inside profile, because she was always doing something. And she even used to say to me, sitting down is wasteful. So, you know, I'm just always busy. And I was talking through a problem I had with my coach. And it involved another person, and she'd really shown she'd listened. She'd been an active listener and paraphrased what I'd said. And then she finally said, okay, this is what the other person's done, Lynn, that's caused you some difficulties. And she'd really showed she'd understood. And the core of coaching is about focusing on what you've got control over. And we don't have control over how anybody else behaves. So she said, so that's what they've done, but we've got no guarantees that they could ever change. We could, you know, brainstorm some options about how you could influence them, but there's no guarantee they could be different. They might be different. So can you think of any part you have in why this relationship isn't the best relationship possible? That's quite challenging, isn't it? I thought, no. You know, I'm Miss Perfect. I try really hard to, you know, get things right. So she gave me the chance to challenge myself, and I couldn't take it up. It was a blind spot. And I imagine she paused and thought, have I earned the right to confront her? And she had. She said, well, I don't know if this is useful, Lynn. I've never seen you with this other person. But one of the things I've noticed when we're together is you seem quite anxious about time. I thought, of course I'm anxious about time. I'm really busy. And then I said, I don't really even know what you mean I'm anxious about time. And you must give examples if you ever use this skill. She said, okay, I'll give you an example. We've been together for about an hour, and you seem to have quickly glanced at the clock about a dozen times. I said, I haven't. If I'd have glanced at the clock a dozen times, I would have known it was nearly 1 o'clock. Now, I didn't know it was nearly 1 o'clock, so I can't have been glancing at the clock a dozen times. And I'm psychologically going, got ya. And she didn't say, you did, so I could go, I didn't. She just said in a very calm, kind way, well, that was the impression I had. And then you must tell somebody why you're using this tough love. She said, and the reason I thought it was worth mentioning was, it sometimes confuses me, Lynn. Because on one level, you're so interested in what we do, and I get so connected with you, and then I see those little movements, and sometimes I think, oh, perhaps I'm boring her. And I wondered if you did it with me, whether it's possible it might be a habit that you could do with other people. And I didn't say, oh, thank you, what wonderful feedback. I'm thinking, why are you upsetting me when I'm trying to be very perfect? And the reason it worked was, I felt she cared about me. She'd always seen what was right with me. She was open to criticism. Why would she do it if she didn't care about me? And then I started to notice some behaviours that didn't always serve me well. And the final point I want to make about challenges, you must never confront somebody, something that can make them feel not okay, using information that's based on what other people have told you. We call it hearsay. You can only talk to them about your experience with them, because if you say, well, the rest of the staff have said, straight away they picture all these people talking about them negatively behind their back. And they can't hear anymore. All they can picture is this negativity. So really good coaches learn what I call you-me talk. I'll only ever give an example if I'm going to do something that's difficult to tell you about what you do with me. Okay. So if I had any basic message to give you, it would be, if you want to be an exceptional leader, learn how to coach. It is worth the investment, because not only does it help you develop other people, it gives you all the emotional intelligence competence you need for two other great leadership styles. One is the participative leadership style, which Generation Y, millennials demand. And it also gives you one which would really fit your culture, which is all about creating harmony. And I think because people want to help each other here, and if you don't ever have the courage to show tough love, sometimes they stay stuck. I think that's a gift that women could give each other as long as we do it with kindness. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.